Power without limits destabilizes society. The ancient writers of the Hebrew Bible understood this danger long before economists or political philosophers began studying it. They recognized that prosperity is not simply the result of opportunity, it is the result of structure. Wealth requires discipline. Without discipline, prosperity becomes temporary. One of the clearest places this idea appears is in a text many modern readers treat too casually: the Book of Proverbs. Today, Proverbs is often read as a collection of moral sayings, short pieces of advice about honesty, kindness, or personal character. But, to the ancient Jewish tradition, Proverbs functioned as something deeper. It was a manual for life, and part of life was economic. The book was not only concerned with prayer, virtue, or personal conduct. It was concerned with how individuals built stable households and how stable households built stable societies. In other words, a Proverbs quietly contains an economic philosophy. To understand this philosophy, we must first understand the world in which the text was written. Ancient Israel was not an empire built on endless territory. It was a relatively small society, surrounded by powerful kingdoms. Survival required careful management of resources. Families depended on agriculture, trade, and labor. A poor harvest or a reckless financial decision could destabilize an entire household. Under such conditions, undiscipline mattered. And this is where the wisdom literature of Israel becomes particularly interesting. Instead of presenting wealth as purely a blessing from heaven, Proverbs presents prosperity as something that emerges from behavior. Habits create outcomes. Actions create consequences. And economic stability comes from certain patterns of living. One of the most famous passages in Proverbs illustrates this idea clearly. "Go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider her ways, and be wise. Without having any chief, officer, or ruler, she prepares her bread in summer and gathers her food in harvest." At first glance, this sounds like simple advice about laziness. But beneath the surface lies a deeper economic principle. Preparation creates security. The ant gathers food when food is abundant, not when hunger arrives. This is planning. Planning appears repeatedly throughout Proverbs. The text quietly insists that prosperity depends on foresight. A household that consumes everything during abundance will struggle when scarcity appears. A household that prepares during prosperity gains stability during hardship. This principle may seem obvious, yet many societies ignore it. Periods of prosperity often create complacency. People begin assuming abundance will continue indefinitely. Proverbs warns against this assumption. Planning protects the future. Another passage reinforces this idea. The plans of the diligent lead surely to abundance, but everyone who is hasty comes only to poverty. Here the text introduces a contrast between diligence and haste. Diligence involves steady effort over time. Haste involves impulsive action. The difference between these two approaches shapes economic outcomes. The diligent build gradually. They observe patterns. They adjust their behavior based on experience. The hasty seek quick results. They chase opportunity without structure. A proverb suggests that wealth built through haste rarely lasts. This insight reflects a psychological truth about human behavior. People are naturally drawn toward immediate reward. Delayed reward requires discipline. The book of Proverbs repeatedly encourages this discipline. Another passage offers a striking image. Precious treasure and oil are in a wise man's dwelling, but a foolish man devours it. The contrast is simple. The wise household stores resources. Now, the foolish household consumes everything, yet the underlying message is more subtle. Economic stability requires restraint. Consumption without restraint destroys wealth. This principle appears throughout the book. Again and again, Proverbs returns to the same theme. Discipline precedes prosperity. Yet the text does not present discipline as harsh or joyless. Instead, it presents discipline as intelligent. The wise person observes patterns in life and adjusts behavior accordingly. Consider another example. Know well the condition of your flocks and give attention to your herds. For an ancient audience, flocks represented capital. Livestock produced wool, milk, labor, and trade value. Monitoring these assets was essential. A careless shepherd could lose wealth quickly. This instruction reveals something important about economic awareness. Wealth must be observed. Resources must be managed carefully. In modern language, we might call this financial literacy. But Proverbs expresses the idea more simply. Pay attention to what you own. Understand the condition of your assets. Neglect creates loss. Attention creates stability. The same philosophy appears in another passage. Wealth gained hastily will dwindle, but whoever gathers little by little will increase it. This verse introduces the concept of gradual accumulation. Prosperity grows slowly. The phrase little by little carries profound economic wisdom, and it reflects the principle of compounding effort. Small gains repeated consistently produce lasting results. Rapid gains achieved without structure often disappear just as quickly. The ancient writers of Proverbs understood something that modern finance has rediscovered. Wealth built slowly tends to endure. Wealth built impulsively tends to collapse. Another important theme appears throughout the book. Diligence in work. Whoever is slack in his work is a brother to him who destroys. The language is direct. Neglect and destruction lead to the same outcome. A person who neglects responsibility gradually erodes his own stability. Work in Proverbs is not presented as punishment. It is presented as participation in order. Through disciplined work, individuals create value. Through value creation, households gain stability. And stable households support stable communities. And this connection between personal discipline and social stability is central to the philosophy of Proverbs. Economic behavior is never purely private. When families become reckless with resources, the consequences extend beyond the household. Debt spreads. Dependence increases. Communities become vulnerable. Proverbs therefore treats discipline as both personal and social responsibility. Another verse captures this idea elegantly. While better is a little with righteousness than great revenues with injustice. Here the text introduces the concept of ethical wealth. Prosperity gained through dishonesty undermines long-term stability. Unjust systems eventually collapse. This insight reflects a broader principle. Economic systems depend on trust. Trade requires honesty. Contracts require reliability. A society where dishonesty becomes common cannot sustain economic growth for long. Proverbs, therefore, links character and prosperity. Integrity protects wealth. Corruption destroys it. Yet modern readers often misunderstand the message of Proverbs. Some interpret the text as promising automatic prosperity to those who behave well. But the book does not present wealth as guaranteed. Instead, it presents wisdom as increasing the probability of stability. Wise behavior reduces risk. Foolish behavior increases it. This distinction is subtle but important. A Proverbs is not a promise of riches. It is a guide to economic resilience. It explains the habits that tend to produce stability over time. These habits include discipline, diligence, patience, and planning. 4 simple principles, yet they appear repeatedly throughout the book. The repetition is deliberate. Human beings easily forget these principles. Periods of prosperity encourage risk. Periods of success encourage overconfidence. The writers of Proverbs recognized this tendency, so they embedded reminders throughout the text. Consider the broader implication of this system. If individuals build disciplined households, those households create stable communities. Stable communities produce stable economies, and stable economies limit the concentration of reckless power. Power without limits destabilizes society. But disciplined households create natural limits. They reduce dependence on unstable authority. They preserve economic independence. This may explain why Proverbs blends spiritual wisdom with practical instruction. Faith and daily life are not separate categories. They reinforce one another. A person who practices wisdom in spiritual life should also practice wisdom in economic life. Yet many modern families separate these two areas completely. Faith is treated as a spiritual activity. Finance is treated as a technical subject. The result is a strange imbalance. A people pursue religious devotion while ignoring financial discipline. Or they pursue wealth while ignoring ethical principles. The writers of Proverbs would likely find this separation puzzling. In their worldview, wisdom governed every area of life. Spiritual discipline strengthened economic discipline. Economic discipline supported social stability. The system was integrated. This integration may explain the enduring relevance of Proverbs. So although the economic environment has changed dramatically since the text was written, the underlying psychology remains remarkably familiar. Human beings still struggle with impatience. They still chase rapid success. They still neglect planning during prosperous times. The warnings in Proverbs address these tendencies directly. They remind readers that prosperity requires structure. Discipline guides behavior. Diligence sustains effort. Patience allows gradual growth. Planning prepares the future. Together, these habits form an economic system, not a system based on speculation or sudden opportunity, but a system based on consistent behavior. The quiet brilliance of the book of Proverbs lies in its simplicity. The text does not present complex financial strategies. Instead, it presents enduring principles. Observe carefully. Work diligently. Plan patiently. Act with integrity. These principles may appear ordinary, yet history shows that societies often ignore them. And when discipline disappears, instability soon follows. The ancient sages who preserved Proverbs understood this clearly. So they wrote a book that appears simple on the surface, but reveals deeper wisdom when studied carefully. It is not merely a collection of sayings. It is a framework for stability, a reminder that prosperity requires restraint, a warning that haste destroys wealth, and a quiet lesson that wisdom governs both faith and finance. The system hidden within Proverbs is therefore not mysterious. It is practical. It teaches that wealth grows from disciplined behavior sustained over time. And perhaps that is why the book has survived for thousands of years. Because while economies change, human nature remains remarkably consistent. And wisdom, when written carefully enough, remains useful in every generation.